Good morning, everyone. We're about 1 minute out from getting started as we have many members logging in right now. So we'll be with you in just a moment. Good morning, everyone. It's 10 a.m. on July 8th, and we are here for our Governor's Task Force meeting on student debt. So good welcome. I will now turn it over for welcome remarks to our Chair, Secretary Blumenfeld.
Thank you, Michelle. Can you hear me okay? My volume all right? Okay.
You sound very good.
Good. Well, welcome everyone to meeting number 5. There's been a flurry of activity happening, and I appreciate everyone's quick response to the survey following meeting number 4. We have another action-packed meeting scheduled for you today. In addition to 2 subject matter dives, we've allotted about half of the time together for our assigned work group breakout discussions. So I'm really excited to have discussion flowing. And I'm happy to say that we were able to accommodate everyone's first choice of their work group. So that was great. You guys did perfectly in your responses and divided into 3 on your own. So what an awesome group you are. If we move to the next slide, I just, before we dive into the agenda, I just want to do a quick public service announcement highlighting a fantastic new resource for student loan borrowers that have questions regarding COVID-19. The Student Debt Hotline is a collaborative effort between the Wisconsin Coalition on Student Debt, which several of you are members of and sit on the task force or on our work group, and Ascendium Education Solutions. So they've worked together to offer a free student loan debt hotline for Wisconsin borrowers. So Ascendium's repayment support team has created a new toll-free number that borrowers call to ask questions about COVID-19 relief. They have a dedicated team to provide more information to borrowers about their student loans and repayment options based on their specific circumstances. So we've talked in other meetings about how nice it is actually to talk to a real live person and describe your situation and get help with the questions that you have. So my ask to all of you is just if you have stakeholders or people where you can promote this, it's a great resource. It's free. It's live help. It can be loans with any servicer. They have really trained up a staff to be able to answer questions and go above and beyond during this time, during COVID-19, and really help people navigate through this process. So just ask if you've got people that you think would benefit, please make sure to reach out to them. And I know Connie Hutchinson and Laura Sutherland and Cheryl Rapp that have been working on our task force have been very, very involved in getting that up and running. So that's awesome. And then secondly, I would be, as we kind of go through our second half of our meetings, I would be remiss if I didn't recognize all the behind the scenes work that has been happening. We have a team that's been working tirelessly to do research, organizing, writing, facilitating, and really rolling up their sleeves to do whatever is needed to orchestrate these task force meetings. So bravo to Catherine Haberlin, Jess Nelk, Marco Yusarevich, Cody Castor, Cheryl Rapp, Laura Sutherland, and our very own facilitator, Michelle Reinen, who's managing 2 of these work task forces at one time. And then we have 2 great summer interns, Sophie Blumenstein and Emma Steinberger. They've been really, really helpful and working hard to help prepare some of the summary solutions that we'll talk about later. So I sincerely thank all of you for your great work and efforts. And now for a review of our detailed agenda, here's Michelle. I will be back later to set the table, if you will, for our work group discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary. And since the work group is silent, I will thank you for the shout out on behalf of all of us. I think we're all having a good time doing this work as well. So as it relates to the task force agenda for today specifically, we are going to have a couple of presentations before we dive into those breakout room work group discussions. We'll hear about a tribal college overview and have two speakers there that will be introduced in mere moments. We will have a for-profit institutions panel discussion as well, and then we'll have a short break, talk more about the process and next steps, and adjourn the full task force meeting in essence by moving to the work group discussion rooms, where we will have three facilitators go over the proposed solution papers, and you will be able to have a deep dive conversation as well and really dig in on these issues so we can move towards those final goals and objectives there. So with that said, we will move to our roll call, which we're getting very good at, and I fall behind. So bear with me as we go through the roll call. I've got almost everyone checked off, but we will begin using our chat feature and function here with all right, Secretary Kathy Blumenfeld is here ahead of me. And then we go with Derek Campbell here, Executive Secretary Connie Hutchinson. Thank you. And then we have Laura Sutherland. Great. Kiona Jones. Not seeing Kiona on the list yet. Larry Graves, thank you. Jeff Brandt. Jeff, are you with us? I hadn't seen you in the lineup when I was doing a look yet, so we'll circle back there. Brandon Trujillo. Not seeing Brandon yet. All right, Rebecca Larson. Thank you, Rebecca. Representative Ballwig. I know I saw your camera, so I will clock you in as well. Representative Hesselbein. Thank you. Senator Smith. Good morning. And Shannon Halsey. Good morning. And then we go to, I'm having pop up, here we go, Masood Akhtar, thank you. Kiamani Elford, and Karen Bauer, and Shannon Conlon. Good morning, and Jody Chung, and Lucy Fensel, Renee Gash, and Austin Hammond. Good morning, Marisha Harris and Renee Howard Pius. Thank you. And Sylvie Eisen and Derek Kindle. Shane Laloney, sorry, I was using the screen. My notes is in for Derek. Paul Kundert. All right, not hearing from Paul yet. Kevin McShane and Jamie Miller. Good morning. Michael Madursky is here by phone. Oh, thank you, Michael. And Michael Rosen. And then we have Alex Shade is chimed in earlier, and Casey Wachniak. Great, thank you, everyone. And we will circle back in the discussion rooms as well to check in if others have been able to join us. So with that, we will move directly into our agenda, and I will turn the microphone back over to the Secretary for introductions.
Thank you, Michelle. Our next two panelists are going to give us a tribal college overview and some recommendations, and we'll have some time for questions. So I'm going to introduce both Lucy and President Halsey, and then Lucy, after you're done, you Shannon or President Halsey, you can go right in if that's okay. So Lucy is interim dean of Letters and Science and acting chief academic officer for the College of the Menominee Nation in Kenosha in Green Bay. Is that right, Kenosha? You can correct me, Lucy, afterwards. It says Kenosha or Kashina. Sorry, thank you. Lucy has also served as a faculty member with the college since 2012. So please welcome fellow task force member Lucy Fenzel. And President Holsey, Shannon Holsey, was elected to serve as president of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of the Mohican Indians in October of 2015, following 8 years of being a member on the tribal council. She's the youngest to have ever led the Stockbridge-Munsee, which has about 1,470 enrolled members and is one of 11 Native tribes in Wisconsin. Shannon grew up on the Stockbridge-Munsee Reservation in Bowler, Wisconsin, and has committed the tribe to serving as good stewards of its economic, environmental, and cultural traditions, as well as intellectual resources. The Stockbridge-Munsee tribe is the largest employer in Shawano County. Thank you for joining us today, President Holsey. We're delighted that you could be here in this role and be part of our task force. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lucy.
Hello, everybody. I'm just in the process of sharing. Let's see if I can everybody see all of that?
We can
See, it looks great. It looks like we're in your presenter view. So if you could go at the top left, there's display settings. If you click that and then swap presenter view. Perfect. Thank you.
Is that okay? Wonderful. Okay. So I am Lucy Fenzel. I'm the interim dean of letters and sciences. I'm also the interim Green Bay Oneida campus site coordinator and a biology faculty member for the College of Menominee Nation. We are in Keshena and in Green Bay. I did thankfully get the acting chief academic officer role off of my plate, and we now have Geraldine Sanapaw, who is in that role, helping out with that until we can find a permanent chief academic officer. So I did want to start with a little bit of an overview of tribal college, the tribal colleges. A lot of people don't even know that tribal colleges exist. When I start telling them that I teach or work at a tribal college, they kind of go, what? So we are a member of the Tribal Colleges and University System, or TCUs. We are accredited through the Higher Learning Commission. We're one of two in Wisconsin. The Lakota also have a tribal college as well in Wisconsin. We are a private, not-for-profit institution. We are chartered by the Menominee people. We have been since 1993. Then in 1994, we were authorized by the U.S. Congress as one of 3 land-grant colleges in the state of Wisconsin. We award several different types of degrees. We have technical degrees in medical office technician, CNC machinist, electricity, and welding. We have associate's degrees in biological and physical sciences, pre-pharmacy, business administration, digital media, early childhood education, liberal studies, natural resources, pre-engineering, public administration, and substance abuse counselor. And we also do bachelor's degrees in education, early childhood, middle childhood education, and business administration and public administration. So we have a wide variety of different types of degrees for students. Our enrollment, because we have to maintain at least 51% Native American population to be considered a TCU, we have about 84% Native American and 16% non-Native American students. And we have approximately 38% that are full-time and 62% that are part-time. Most of our TCUs do not participate in federal student loan programs, and that's throughout the United States. And the reason for that is that it affects our distribution of Title IV funding. If students default on student loans, they basically become or can become ineligible for Title IV funding. And the problem also comes in that the institution itself can actually be at risk of losing our Title IV funding as well. If a student withdraws or stops out after a specific date early on in the semester, their Title IV funding has to be returned. We call that a return to Title IV. And that then leaves the student with a bill. So I did kind of want to touch on that, and I will touch on that in another slide or two, and how that affects the student. But this doesn't mean that the student goes without funding, because they can fill out their FAFSA, and then our tribal students are all eligible for federal Pell Grants, all sorts of federal grants, state grants, as well as they are also eligible for work study and public and private scholarships as well. We do have some paid internship opportunities that a lot of our students will take advantage of. We have some American Indian College Fund internship opportunities. We just received one of those we're one of 2 tribal colleges in the U.S. who were awarded some internship opportunities through a career readiness grant, as well as we have our own Sustainable Development Institute that provides internship opportunities through grant funding. So we do have a lot of opportunities for Native Americans to actually get funding without having student loans. They also have the opportunity of going to their own tribal higher education departments to acquire funding. Each tribe houses their own tribal higher education department. They all vary. So I'm not going to talk a lot about all of the different tribes in the state of Wisconsin and how they all differ. But I did give a brief overview here that you can see of how the Menominee Higher Education offers students in adult vocational training and in their technical diploma training or their associate degree or bachelor degree programs. You'll also notice that in this overview, tribes will also grant through their higher education departments specific amounts. They will usually have a maximum per academic year or per semester that they will give based on the credits that the student is taking. You'll also notice at the bottom that I've given an example of the fact that they also will top out at a specific maximum funding that's available. And students can continue to get degrees, but they will only receive funding as long as they are still eligible within that maximum amount. So we do have some students who have actually burned through their maximum and they're still continuing on with other degrees. So I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of what happens when a student comes in. So we get a new student and they're accepted and they're enrolled, and then they fill out their FAFSA, and they will receive any of those grants or work study or scholarships, etc. They get those monies and they begin their classes. We have a very high risk population, and the struggles that occur with life and or school, a lot of them may be single parents and they don't have childcare. There's so many different struggles that can happen, and very early on in the semester, they tend to stop out, and or whether they're dropping out or they're being moved away from school totally to go get a job, whatever the case may be, we then have to go through what's called a return to Title IV. And we have to send all of that money that they were awarded from Title IV back to the government, which then leaves the student with a bill. So then let's say the student wants to come back and they want to get back into the degree that they currently were in or start a different degree, then they have to go back through and go through a process where they have to work with the financial aid department to have a payment plan, because they can't come in with that current bill. So the other problem is that the institution itself, College of Menominee Nation, does not go after the student for that money when they still are left with that bill. And if they stop out permanently, we're not going after them for that bill. We then have to take that as a loss. The student can then sometimes, and I don't know if you can see where my cursor is, the student will then have to go back through, fill out a FAFSA. They go back through and they cycle through this student cycle. And we found that without the appropriate student services or retention plans in place to help those students stay in school and give them that continued support, they tend to cycle through this student life cycle several times before they actually reach graduation. So we really find that it's necessary to keep those student supports in place. Well, how did COVID-19 affect us? COVID-19 then affected us in several different ways. We saw that the tribal higher education departments had decreased funding for the students. So the students are now getting less funding per year or even per semester. K-12 schools, when they went online, students went through a huge childcare issue because they couldn't log in online to their classes because they were watching their kids or else helping their kids with their schooling. So we ended up seeing a huge dropout rate significantly once we went to online programming, and it was very difficult for them, as well as the fact that they didn't have, a lot of the Kashina students did not have internet even. So then a lot of the students stopped out. We had to return that Title IV money, and then the students are left with a bill. CMN then is left with unpaid tuition, which we have to, which basically then equates to lost revenue for us. So as we move forward with all of this, we do have a few recommendations because of these major issues. So starting with the fact that we do have a very high risk population. They struggle with all sorts of things that get in the way of finishing school, which then leaves them with that bill, which then also leaves the institution potentially with that bill. The non-native students, however, as you notice, there was a lot of funding that we do get for our Native American students, but not for our non-native students. And because we don't use student loans, it becomes an issue for our non-native students. And that's why many of them are just part-time, because they can't fund their schooling here. The other things that then would help us would hopefully be perhaps something like debt forgiveness for the institutions who are taking that hit for the students because we've had to send back their Title IV funding, as well as increased funding for things like childcare or other student support services and retention that will keep that student in actually in school so that they don't stop out. We have to send back their money, and then they end up with that huge bill that they're trying to deal with all through school. So these are just a few of the things that I wanted to touch on, just to kind of give you an overview of what TCUs are like, or what school is like for TCU students. So if there's any other questions, I will stop sharing once I end my slideshow.
Thank you very much, Lucy. And we will turn it over to Shannon now to get both presentations, and then ask the task force members that have questions to just put those in the chat or email the email address, and we will take those all at the end and split those between the two speakers. So Shannon, if you are ready to go, we'll have you join us now.
Good morning, everybody. I'm trying to upload my share, so please forgive me. I am IT challenged. So, okay. Can you see me, or can you see it, I should say?
Yep, we'll just want you to move that into that presentation mode on the slideshow, but it looks great.
Okay. Trying to go back to the screen. My apologies. Trying to find the icon. Liz made it look so easy. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. I wasn't ready. I can see the presentation, but I can't see you. So I have to find the WebEx icon. Sorry.
Shannon, I think
here we go. I can see
we-
it finally. It popped up. So let's see.
yeah, we can
need
see
to
your
expand.
presentation. We just need you to put it into slideshow mode.
Okay. I am not seeing the whole screen. Sorry.
So if you're able, either the bottom right or the top left, there's the slideshow icon. There's like a little box on a stand on the bottom right.
Right, but what I'm looking at is it's showing me the web page, but I'm looking for the WebEx because it's showing me it in presentation mode, but it's not showing me the actual WebEx, so I can do that. I see it when Liz did hers; it was up in the left-hand corner, but I'm not seeing how I can expand it. So let me see.
Oh.
So. I don't know.
Shannon, this is Kathy. We can see you when you're
Okay.
speaking, and we can see your presentation. So, oh, maybe you just got it though.
I can see it in PowerPoint, but I'm not seeing it in WebEx because I saw how Kathy did it and adjusted it, but it's not doing that for me. So let me see. I can go to another screen. My apologies. Okay, I can see you, but let me see if I can expand it. Okay, well, I'll just try to come back to it because I'm not seeing it.
Shannon, very quickly, when you shared, did you share PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. You should be able to, enter slideshow mode. Right now, I'm seeing just a blank screen. Now I'm seeing the presentation. But yeah, if you hit slideshow mode, it should just be fine.
Show taskbar, display settings.
Awesome. Yep, you got it.
Okay, so got it. Sorry about that. Okay.
That's all good.
So everybody can see it, right?
Oh, actually, now we're seeing your the note side. So if you could do top left, there's display settings.
Okay.
Oh.
I'll share it again. So,
All right, we see your presentation, but it's in like note mode.
Okay.
Or presenter mode. Could you top left? There's display settings tab.
I'm not seeing that. Let's see. It's assign, share, mute. It's not showing me that. So is there something I should?
You can just keep it like this. This is fine. And just
Okay.
go with it. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, everyone, but I'll upload it. So today I just wanted to talk about the disparities specifically in student debt. I just to give you a purview of just a snapshot of Native Americans. To Liz's point, Native Americans and Alaska Natives, they only comprise of less than 1% of the undergraduate population and 1% of the total graduate populations. And honestly, what I wanted to talk to you today from just a larger purview is some of the challenges associated with that, but also the fact that there is a huge lack of research and data that are reported due to the small sampling size of this population. And so it's really difficult in terms of from a decision-making perspective of how that is. So just student debt in a snapshot, basically I just want to touch today on the fact of enrollment, degree attainment, and challenges. I know that I have very little time, so I'll try to be very succinct about it. So in terms of Native Americans and completion and degree attainment, the completion rate for Native American students, they fall significant between those of their non-Native counterparts. 23% of all of our students are first-time students and attending a four-year institution, and compared to the 44% of non-Native or white students. 40% of those Native American students that seek bachelor's degrees graduate within 6 years compared to the nearly 63% of their counterparts. So some of the challenges that are associated with it is it's one of, as I talked about earlier, it's really difficult to track accurate college participation rates for Native American students because they are not tracked at all attainment levels. And to Liz's point, they are more likely to need or receiving federal financial assistance. Between 2011 and 2012, 85% of Native American students received some type of federal grant aid compared to the 69% of non-Native students. And 62% of those Native students took out some type of student loan compared to 56% of non-Native students. And to Liz's point, I really want to expand on the fact that there is definitely data to support the fact that Native American students are less likely to be prepared for college because of some of those challenges she expounded on earlier. And so there is always that challenge, especially when we prepare them for college to make them college ready. There is sometimes limited access to advanced placement or college prep courses. And also, to her point, also the lack of sometimes the necessary infrastructure with regards to what that looks like for even virtual learning. So and then the other part of it is there's the students also from a supportive perspective. Native American students are less likely to have family members, so they are sometimes first-time college students that attended. In 2017, it was indicated that there were 21% of Native American students under the age of 18 that lived within the household with a parent who had completed a bachelor's degree or higher, compared to 52% of non-Native households. So some of the racial disparities I wanted to talk to you today about, specifically just not Native Americans because of the capture of our data, but just racial disparities for other race groups compared to white or Caucasian. So some of the areas are disparities include borrowing habits, default disparities, historical racial disparities, and parental assistance, and then the student debt at graduation. And I think we can all agree in an era of rising tuition costs and corresponding increases in student debt across the board, there are certain racial minorities appear to be disproportionately affected. And I know significantly the impact of Native American communities, one, because I'm the president of my tribal nation, but also because I'm the president of the Great Lakes Intertribal Council that is connected to the 11 tribal nations in the state of Wisconsin. And to Liz's point, we're always trying to find that balance. But there's a growing body of research that points to startling inequality with regards to the debt burdens carried by Black, Latino, and Native American students, and compared to that are shouldered by white and Asian students. Best studied, there's dramatic or astronomically higher student loan debts of all of those comparative races. And some of the reasons, as I stated, some of these disparities are not entirely understood, and the systematic study of these issues hindered the lack of data that I had talked about earlier, though notably the Department of Education had been inconsistent in recording the racial characteristics of borrowers, furthering the problem like roots and racial inequalities outside the higher education sphere. And a number of those hypotheses really hinder the opportunity to really look at it from a core competency or a policy perspective of how we can eradicate or how we can diminish some of these challenges. So some of the borrowing habits are, again, I know that I have a limited amount of time, are that it's at a it's a much higher rate in terms of the access to resources. So some of the borrowing habits that are data driven and also just from an internal knowledge or intellectual perspective are pretty much disproportionate, almost 2 to 1 in terms of the amount that's borrowed from white students to the students that I expounded on, both being Black, Native American, and the others. So So what my thought is today is that there is much that needs to be done. And I really appreciate the fact that I'm here today and to talk about these things. But much to Liz's point, I think there is huge opportunity in looking at some of these things and studying them more intrinsically. I mean, in terms of, she had some about forbearance or loan repayment to the actual institute. But I think it's safe to say that those racial disparities and that defy easy solutions and a number of, from a policy perspective, one of my thoughts is making income-driven repayment opportunities available, because there's a disparity in that, but also making that income-driven repayment IDR mandatory. Also looking at opportunities to regularly track the federal borrowing habits along racial lines. Also looking at a way to expand debt cancellation to a broader areas and fields, especially because just based on the data extrapolation that I'm able to get from our respective education office, we know that there is a huge need for people of color and diversity to go into the fields of teaching. And yet there is not enough, in my opinion, done to create or to diminish that disparity, not just of because I think it's really important to, from an educational perspective, to have diverse groups of people teaching our children, from an infrastructure perspective and self-sustainability perspective, because I think that it helps enlighten and enlist these young people to continue on that necessary. I mean, I have talked to the governor explicitly about this, and of course, we all know that he is truly engaged and committed to education, and even looking at it from an infrastructure perspective. I mean, he's developed this board and this task force. So I would hope that as we look to our work groups, we also look at those broader fields from a policy perspective. And of course, the data collection that's based on race to drive some of the decisions we're talking about, that disparity as it relates to student debt. I know from my personal perspective that there has been many challenges, and I always tell students specifically, especially in my community, that you have to look at it also as an investment in yourself. So it's a balance or alignment of how you invest in yourself, but it's yet affordable so that your student loan payment does not become more than your mortgage payment, and so that there is that alignment and balance. So I do hope that it is that, my hope that there is that opportunity to look towards that. And to Liz's point too, I think tribal community colleges are the best kept secret in Indian country or just in the United States. They're phenomenal institutes that are very foundational and something that needs to be very much supported in different ways from a policy perspective and from a resource perspective. My apologies for the brevity of my presentation, but I will provide it to the group at some point when I figure it out. But my point is that I do think that we really have to look at those things from a policy perspective, that there is still much to learn about that, but a lot of it will require sort of the effectuation and the desire to collect the necessary data to drive those decisions. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Shannon, and thank you for your patience in trying to get that to display. We appreciate that. And for the task force members, when we do receive that, we'll email that out to you, and then we'll also be posting it on the website. But as it relates to questions, Lucy, I see that you had a response to something that Shannon was stating here in regarding offering some tuition assistance. Would you like to expand on that? And then I'll go into the task force questions.
Sure. We have toyed with the idea of using tuition assistance at some point, either for 3 credits, 6 credits, trying to figure out how we utilize some of the CARES funding that we've currently gotten. However, some of the programming that we currently use COVID-19 aside, we're utilizing some of the COVID money that we've received. However, without that, we still struggle because most of our funding comes from grants. And a lot of those grants are very restrictive in what we can or cannot use them for. So we do have to be very, very careful with offering things like tuition assistance or free tuition for certain programming. The other problem that comes in is that when these students have acquired such large bills and they're returning and we're not seeking that restitution or anything. We're taking that as lost revenue. That also becomes an issue because then we're operating at a loss in our budget.
Thank you for that. There is a question that has come in, and either or both of you in wanting to respond to this. Is there CARES money going directly to the tribal colleges, or should that be part of the Wisconsin CARES funding? And I've just heard you mention that a bit, Lucy, but if you could expand on that question, or Shannon as well.
Most of our funding that we're getting from the CARES Act are coming from federal dollars. We do have also, we are a Title III school, so we do get Title III funding, and we have received help from a lot of our other private grantors that have also stepped up to help us. Our biggest problem we found when we had to go to online was that the Keshena campus and the people that live on the Menominee Reservation have a very low bandwidth. And so we've been trying to deal with issues of even connectivity for our students. Many of them don't have laptops. So we've had people step up to offer assistance in making sure that our students have everything they need. Through those CARES Act funding, we are now able to firm up our IT infrastructure within the college and be able to offer those types of things and services to the students where we wouldn't have been able to prior to getting that CARES Act money directly to us.
Just to piggyback off of what Liz had expounded on, I know that there was some discussion with the CARES stimulus and the BIE and how that was going to work. But to her point, most rural communities, native rural communities, have infrastructure problems. So much, in fact, our tribal nation has just made a $4 million investment in expanding broadband 56 miles, which transcends beyond our reservation because we are contiguous to Keshena or to the Keshena campus to expand that, not just for post-secondary virtual learning, but for just for primary learning too. So we understand the challenges associated with that. And then the other part of it is not only just the slow broadband or the slow bandwidth, but also the problem that comes with the resources needed. So we've had to expand guest Wi-Fi. We've had to do different things for a virtual learning platform so that we could facilitate the need from just, like I said, because many college students started off semester and then during the advancement of the COVID-19 virus, then became virtual learners. So it's been that. And also just sometimes having access to the necessary hardware that they didn't have. So there's multiple challenges. And I would think that there would be just indicative, not just of Native American students, but students in general.
Thank you. And I'll take one more of the questions, and the other question we'll be sending to you for response if you would. But this is for both, I believe. What would be needed to make some of your degree and certificate programs available tuition-free to students? And is this an option that you think your school would be interested in offering?
Well, I know that our school would be definitely interested in offering tuition assistance like that or tuition-free. I think that part of our problem is that we need to get past that institutional budget problem that we currently have, because we do tend to run on a negative budget because of the fact that we have all of these students with all of these outstanding bills that we're not seeking repayment for all of the time. So if there were other types of funding that could offset those monies that we're losing in lost revenue due to tuition. So basically, it's almost like a tuition assistance for the institution, that we could recover that and then be able to offer those programs, I think.
Thank you very much. And thank you to you both today for spending time with us and presenting and providing the information that you have to the task force, so we have a full picture and better understanding. And there is a question and another statement if task force members want to pay attention to the chat room as we transition to our next speakers and panel, as well as we will follow up with both speakers and trying to receive responses to those and getting those out. So with that said, we will transition back to the secretary for introductions of our panel.
Great, thank you. Thank you both, Lucy and Shannon, for great presentations and really allowing us to understand some of the struggles and the challenges you have, and also to help us learn more about the great tribal colleges that exist and the offerings that you have. It's really quite spectacular. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us as well. And now we will transition to our next panel, which will be on the for-profit colleges. And I will introduce both of our speakers similar to what I did in the last one. So we'll start with Seth Frothman, who, welcome back, Seth. You're a second-time presenter. It's kind of like on Saturday Night Live when people come back. So we really appreciate you having you here. So Seth will be kicking off our for-profit institutions panel. Seth is one of the nation's, as you may recall, leading experts on the intersection between higher education finance, consumer protection, and public policy. By way of refresh, Seth previously served as the Assistant Director and Student Loan Ombudsman for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB, where he led the government-wide effort to develop consumer-driven policy reforms and protect millions of Americans with student debt. Seth spoke at our very first task meeting. We're glad to have you back. So really appreciate all the time and energy you've put into helping us with this task force. And I will also introduce our speaker following, our very own Casey Wachmiak, who is the School Administration Consultant with the Educational Approval Program, which sits within our Wisconsin Department of Safety and Professional Services, or DSS. The Educational Approval Program, or EAP, is charged with the oversight of most for-profit post-secondary schools in Wisconsin, as well as certain out-of-state nonprofit colleges and universities, currently amounting to 185 institutions. In her position, Casey works on issues of compliance, student protection, and institutional effectiveness. She consults with individuals and businesses as they look to develop new schools and programs. She also works with students and institutions through both precipitous and planned school closures. Students attending proprietary schools comprise a unique facet of our student debt picture, and we're happy to hear Casey's insight as a task force member. So thank you, Casey. And we'll go back and have Seth kick it off. Thanks to both of you.
Great, can you guys hear me okay? Last time I did like 5 minutes on mute, so I want to make sure that you all can hear me this time.
We can hear you, maybe just a little louder.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much, Secretary, for having me back. And I've been watching from afar all of the awesome work that you guys have been doing, and have been so impressed with your guys' approach to trying to bring all of these different facets and all of these different stakeholders together to try to tackle the student debt crisis. And, you know, I think on the topic that we are going to talk about today, which is for-profit schools, this is the exact right approach to try to really address a really troubling issue that has just been lingering, been permeating the higher education space for quite a bit of time, which is the extent to which there are predatory for-profit schools that prey on the most vulnerable borrowers in America and in your state. So anybody who's been following higher education, and I know that constitutes all of you as part of the task force over the past decade or so, has seen just the remarkable number of stories about enforcement actions against predatory schools, precipitous for school closures, which have left thousands of people with a mound of debt and no degrees, and then also just just really troubling practices at many of these schools, driving some of the worst outcomes of the student debt crisis. And what we've seen is a real focus on the practices at the actual institutions of higher education, from law enforcement at the federal, state level, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where I used to work, the Federal Trade Commission, state attorney general's offices, and the list goes on, highlighting, deceptive employment statistics, misrepresentations about ability to sit for credentials, violating incentive comp rules, and just a general range of really troubling illegal practices around marketing, educational quality, and lending practices. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about today, and I think why a task force like this is so important, is a focus on, besides just the schools itself, but the web of companies and practices that allow for-profit schools to thrive. And I think we're going to quickly run through all of these, but I think my hope is to kind of leave you all with the idea about tackling the predatory school market really takes a holistic view. This isn't just the job for the State Higher Education Committee. There is a role for, consumer protection for the state legislature, for the banking department, and the list goes on and on and on. So I just wanted to kind of run through some of the different troubling practices that I've seen that not only, again, really harm individual students and borrowers, but really allow a troubling system to continue. So the first of these is the shadow student loan market. And I think this is what we generally see are lenders. These used to be banks, but now a lot of these are actually smaller specialty non-bank lenders who make loans specifically around for-profit institutions. Some of these to unaccredited schools, some of these to Title IV schools. But the common trait is that many of these loans are just riddled with consumer risk. We see a lot of these lenders who, will not get a consumer lending license in a state, have loans pushing 20% interest rate with unconscionable fees on top of that, and debt collection practices, which are just appalling. And we'll talk a little bit more about that going on. And in a lot of ways, these are the institutions that allow these schools to flourish, where people will take out, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 of debt for a trucking school, a cosmetology school, and it's just nearly impossible to see how these people will ultimately pay it back. And I think what you see on the right side are some of the recent actions against these players. We see it at the state level most recently, where Connecticut, New York, and Minnesota have all taken either enforcement actions or through their bank regulator regulatory actions to try to really crack down on kind of these really shady lenders, which are harming a lot of students, but then also providing the financing mechanisms which let these schools survive and thrive. So the next practice are deceptive marketers and lead generators. So again, I used to work at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and my first job was doing military consumer protection. And one of the very first things I worked on was this company called GIBill.com, which was actually funded by a hedge fund. And miraculously, every time you went to GIBill.com to figure out where you went to school, it spit out a for-profit institution, regardless of what you put in, what you wanted to study, where you wanted to study. It found the for-profit institution that was supposedly best for you. Nowhere did it disclose that it was a lead generator being paid per lead to fund those for-profit institutions. This website was ultimately taken down by a consortium of state attorney general's office, and GIBill.com was turned over to the VA. But unfortunately, these practices really continue. So the Federal Trade Commission just took an enforcement action against a company called Sunkey Publishing for similar practices. But, you know, there's a lot of things that the federal government isn't doing and where states could step up. So, for example, in most of these enforcement actions, neither the FTC or the Department of Education disclosed who the clients of the deceptive lead generators were. So we do not know like which other schools were actually using these websites. But in terms of propping up schools, these are the companies that continue the enrollments, often deceptively, of getting people in the door. So the next is unscrupulous debt collection practices. So a lot of these practices, unfortunately, occur across the higher education sector, but with a particular focus on tactics at for-profit schools. And what these usually are the withholding of transcripts and diplomas for students who have any amount past due. And this is really kind of a pressure tactic that schools use to try to just wring every last dollar out of students, many of which who've been ripped off, which is they will be unable to like transfer any credits or even get the diploma to try to enter the field they trained for because the school has withheld their transcripts. So both in the last year, California, the state of California and the state of Washington have essentially banned practices like these. So two quick more, and I know I'm running out of time here, is cohort default rate manipulation consultants. So many of you might know, and I think this came up in the last panel, that schools can face a whole lot of sanctions if too many of their borrowers default. The thing is, it is if too many of their borrowers default in a given window. So what the most predatory schools do is they pay an outside consultant to actually push borrowers past the 3-year window using really aggressive forbearance tactics. For example, the Government Accountability Office found that one of these companies was giving borrowers gift cards to enter into forbearances, which would then push them out of the 3-year window. Ultimately, they would default in year 4 or 5, but the school wouldn't be off the hook. And thinking about this from a law enforcement issue, what many of these companies do is just a form of really shady, illegal student loan servicing. And if states, if law enforcement officials are able to kind of crack down on these practices, it becomes a lot more likely that given the very high default rates of these companies, that you would see the worst of the predatory schools fail. And I think the very last thing that I wanted to touch on here is just the use of forced arbitration clauses. So under the prior administration, there was actually a rulemaking in place which would have banned the use of pre-dispute arbitration agreements in school enrollment contracts. What we have seen is from some of the most predatory schools, Corinthian, Art Institute, ITT, Globe, they all included within their actual enrollment agreement that students were unable to hold the school accountable if they broke the law. They wouldn't be able to bring cases, they wouldn't be able to bring class actions. In some of these cases, they wouldn't even be able to file complaints with the accreditor or the Board of Higher Education. So there was an effort at the Department of Education to ban the use of these clauses in enrollment contracts. Unfortunately, the current administration in Washington just rolled that back effective July 1st. And this is an enormous issue around accountability because there's a quote from Senator Durbin on the bottom which shows how by demanding secrecy over these practices, these schools were just able to continue and grow bigger and bigger and harm more people. So what we've seen is states across the country try to step up. So New Jersey and New York this year both have bills to try to replicate the prohibition on pre-dispute arbitration clauses for any school that receives state money. And I think that's a really positive step to try to continue the efforts to try to ensure that borrowers have rights when they've been ripped off. And these extend not just beyond state aid schools, I wanted to flag. You know, a lot of schools in the state receive money through Workforce Investment Act money and others. And I think trying to think through how accountability metrics touch not only kind of your traditional state aid schools, but the full range of schools that are receiving money through the state, I think is just essential when you're thinking about these problems. So I know I went a tad over here, but I think, again, I'd love to answer any questions, but the main point that I want to make here is that when we're thinking about the really important problem of addressing predatory schools that are targeting the most vulnerable borrowers, borrowers of color, women, veterans, service members, disabled borrowers, we need to take a really holistic approach because there's a lot of things that the states can do. Again, it's not just, you know, thinking about the institution, but it's all these practices and players which not only help prop up these schools, but are affirmatively hurting borrowers in the process. So thanks again for letting me talk, and look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much, Seth, for that information. And I'll ask the task force members to chat in their questions as we transition to Casey Wachniak from the Department of Safety and Professional Services. And she'll give us her presentation, and then we'll ask questions of both panelists, both members.
Excellent. Thank you for the introduction and the invitation to present, Secretary Blumenfeld, and for all of you for taking an interest in this issue of for-profit colleges. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that this is a broad issue, and we are comprised of a diverse background of individuals. So in the interest of time, I've compiled some slides that are going to be more of a higher level overview. So for those of you who live and work in this world of for-profits like I do, we might just scratch the surface. So I ask that you bear with me. But for others of you, you know, until maybe you began work on this task force, you really did not know much about this world of for-profit institutions, aside from the advertisements maybe that you've seen out there, or the horror stories, you know, when something goes wrong at an institution and it is reported in the media. So I have supplemented some of these basic slides with additional information. So if you'd like to dive in at a later time and get more into the weeds, I welcome you to do that. But, you know, as an overview, so the Educational Approval Program, like Secretary Blumenfeld mentioned, we're a unit of the Department of Safety and Professional Services, and we are responsible for overseeing the for-profit and certain nonprofit institutions. We operate under a statutory authority that, you know, is granted and then further interpreted by administrative rule. I have included links to both of those, and I encourage you all to sort of take a look and see the types of things that as a state entity we require our approved schools to comply with. But in a nutshell, the EAP exists to protect Wisconsin consumers. Now, in my role as a consultant, I work with schools, I approve schools, I work on compliance and institutional effectiveness. But it's worth noting that at the end of the day, you know, our statutory purpose is consumer protection, and that's something that I don't take lightly. Now, the way that looks on a day-to-day basis is, you know, evaluation of applications for new school approval. We evaluate you know, teaching locations and representatives who are going out and soliciting student enrollments. We look at financial stability when a school is initially applying for approval, and various legal requirements that they're required to adhere to. So, for example, we have a Wisconsin-specific refund policy that's actually more consumer-friendly than what federal requirements dictate. So if a student is withdrawing from an institution or is dismissed, that policy dictates that, you know, a certain amount of refund is owed to them. And then certainly you'll find in the regulations there's requirements that, you know, mandate fair and honest advertising. So if a school is putting out there that, you know, students can get a job, guaranteed placement in their field. They're going to make X amount of money. We certainly are going to want to see the data to back up those claims. Otherwise, we would pressure schools to make some changes. As a consumer protection agency, some other functions just generally, we do investigate complaints that are brought to our attention. I would say in general, we don't see many complaints, and I attribute that to the fact that we're more proactive than reactive in our approach. So liking to get policies and procedures in place with the schools on the front end, so we don't have issues arise that would rise to the level of formal complaints. However, when that does occur, we step in and investigate. Abrupt school closures, that's dominated the news coverage of for-profit schools. So we are able to guide students through the process. We have a student protection fund that allows us to actually indemnify student losses. If they had taken out a loan from a private institution or a private lender or an institutional loan, there are times in an abrupt school closure where we can repay from our state fund student tuition money. Very briefly, this just mirrors something that is also in place at the federal level, a closed school student loan discharge. So that process on the federal level applies to federal student loans. This is kind of in concert with it. And then lastly, conducting planned and unplanned site visits, on the front end to make sure that everything is in order, or when things go awry, we can show up unannounced. So many of you may be wondering, especially given some of the things we've talked about, why these schools exist, why anybody might want to attend a for-profit institution. And I think it's important to recognize that they exist for a reason, because they're not going to go away anytime soon. For-profit schools serve students in a variety of both degree and non-degree programs. They're located in state, out of state, online, on ground, and many of them kind of came about because they serve students that maybe weren't a good fit or didn't find that the in-state public institutions were flexible enough to meet their needs. So students who enroll in EAP approved schools are predominantly over the age of 25. We're not talking about, students right out of high school, largely female population. And with that, we see a lot of working adults who maybe have kids, are juggling a lot of priorities, a lot of competing demands. And so they're seeking flexible learning options. And, more and more as we, shift to a virtual world that is becoming accessible, at the state schools and the nonprofit institutions. But the for-profits were definitely the first ones to sort of latch onto that modality of teaching. So I think it's important to recognize why the schools exist. I've included a link to a database that we keep. It's a listing of all approved schools and programs. And I encourage everybody to take a look at that. And reason being, I think I challenge you to, in your head, come up with 3 or 5 nonprofit institutions that you know about, and type it in and see. So I'm not going to name names, but if it's approved by the EAP, and if it's not, then the reason for that would be either it's exempt under one of our statutory exemptions, it's closed, which we're seeing more and more of. I would say one of those 2 things. The reason why I mentioned this is we have fairly comprehensive regulations already in place. I would argue on the more robust side compared to other states. So for the schools that are actually approved, we're holding them accountable, I think, to a degree that many do not want to call Wisconsin home. So we see schools trying to take advantage of one of the exemptions, or maybe relocate to a different state that maybe has more flexible regulations. Now certainly there's room for improvement, I would say, in those, but in my opinion, the issue is not what the regulations are saying, it's who they're applying to. And so when we look at solutions to the problem, I think it is important to identify ones that you take a holistic approach and apply to institutions across the gamut, rather than specifically the ones that are approved by the EAP. So, we've talked a lot about, and I can certainly agree with, increased financial literacy programs, something along the lines of a borrower's bill of rights, a student loan officer liaison would be hugely effective in making progress. We talk to students often who have no idea until it's too late. They're being pressured by debt collectors. They don't know how much money they owe, to who their lender is that they're supposed to be making payments, interest rates, or various repayment options. There's a lot of uncertainty, and so having an advocate or a liaison that is within the state who can troubleshoot and guide students, I think, would be hugely important. And then Seth had touched on this other big issue, which I would argue is one of the more egregious ones in the for-profit sector, but private loans, and specifically institutional loans, and the practice of essentially holding a student's transcript hostage until they make a full payment of the money that the institution lent them. As Seth mentioned, this prohibits a student from verifying the education that they've received already. So if they want to transfer to another institution, they can't even transfer credits without being able, to vouch for it. And lastly, unfortunately, we've seen some of these problems self-correct over the years with closure of for-profit institutions. Now, that said, I think the trend of school closures will continue, but we are not going to live in a world free of for-profits. And so while we operate in that reality, I think, a bolstered enforcement authority when things do go wrong, and having some holistic protections that are available on a state level to students attending any type of school, whether it's approved by the EAP or not, would be advantageous. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm more than willing to entertain questions, or if you want to go down a certain road, feel free to reach out now or after the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Casey. And we do have a question in response to Seth's presentation that came in as we were transitioning. And I'm sure the task force members will now start charting their questions of you. So Seth, are there good state models on the following? A number of points here. Stop the fraud against veterans by closing the 90-10 loophole. Assure that funds are spent on education, not marketing, and prevent dishonest claims that schools are nonprofit, and protect the student's right to complain.
So great question. So I think, and I'm happy to follow up like we did last time on some specificity, but we have started to see states tackle all of these, which is really exciting. I think we talked about at the first panel how I think states and policy officials and advocates are kind of tired of waiting for Washington to solve this, and I think they realize that states can have like a tremendous role, especially as we are unfortunately probably facing pretty tight budget deadlines, to do more to protect borrowers. So I think we've seen states across the country definitely do 90-10, definitely try to do around the use of educational criteria. And I think the last two, I'll try to do some research, but people have talked about these. And I think just in general, these are awesome efforts. I think thinking through how either legislatively, or I think there's actually a lot of ability to take executive action, thinking through how you use state authorization and other means by which the state allows schools to operate within its borders, will really just be critical over the next few years to try to both protect taxpayers and protect borrowers. So I think you guys here are doing the exact right thing, right? Which is getting all of the people to try to explore how states could just be much more active in protecting borrowers. I think the one thing I did want to flag here, which I'm not sure if you guys have talked about or are familiar with, is when it comes to online education, there has been, in my opinion, some really troubling developments around NC-SARA, which is kind of the reciprocity agreement as it relates to how states can regulate online schools and the extent to which that is going to severely curtail the ability of states to actually put in place their own protections to protect their own students and borrowers. So that should just be something on your guys' radar too, because I feel as if the consumer protection kind of ramifications of states entering into that compact are only really starting to come into clearer view. But I'll get back on specifics. But yes, states have been very active on all of these fronts to try to better protect against predatory for-profit tactics and protect taxpayer dollars.
Thank you for that. And not seeing any other questions at this moment in time. They could still be coming in. But Casey, feel free to decline this question if you'd like. But did you want to expand or describe the state's place as it relates to online schools and any limitations that may exist there that Seth was just mentioning?
Yeah, I'm glad that he did. I think it's worth noting. So states as a whole can enter into this reciprocity agreement. And it's noteworthy that each type of institution, so your publics, your nonprofits, your for-profits, if your state enters into reciprocity, then it encompasses all of those institutions. It's not something that just specifically applies to the for-profits. So there are certainly advantages, maybe more so for certain schools than others, to be a part of reciprocity. Wisconsin was one of the final states to join on, and I think that, you know, for good reason, we had vocalized, we the EAB at the time had vocalized concerns about how we would be able to protect students at for-profit institutions and sort of handing over that authority to a school that is located in another state. We're handing over our consumer protections to that home state. So we raised a lot of concerns. I think that they still exist, though there are other reasons why, as a whole, our state chose to enter the reciprocity agreement.
So this kind of will expand what you just said, Casey, this question that from Karen Bauer, in my opinion, online schools are becoming the most predatory at this time, since many employers still won't hire graduates of these places. Can we get out of the SARA compact?
We can. Any state can enter or exit the compact. Like I mentioned, it would apply to all institutions that are domiciled within that state. So in our specific situation, it would mean this encompasses the tech college schools, UW system schools, and then all of our in-state nonprofits like Marquette University. So we could withdraw from the compact, but we can't only withdraw our oversight of the for-profits. It would apply schools as a whole, and I don't know if that's always been the most popular opinion. It presents a challenge.
So another question is, what changes or rules would help the EAP prevent schools like Everest and the Art Institute that both had very bad records nationally from setting up? Both set up operations in Milwaukee despite sorted records and imploded within 2 years.
I don't know if a creation of more robust regulations would have prevented the issue. I think more enforcement authority when there were red flags along the way, and a greater ability to hold those schools accountable before it gets to this catastrophic situation where there's no saving from. I think that approach would be one that I would like to see more than rewriting all of the regulations we have in place, because they are, they're fairly comprehensive. Room for improvement, but that's the angle I would take.
Thank you. Seth, I see you nodding your head. Would you like to add to that response?
Yeah, I was like, jumping in while on mute. So I think just so quickly on the Sarah point too, I think there is something short of just dropping out, no matter regardless of what your opinion is I feel as if the compact and the people who run it haven't really heard, I feel like there's an opportunity to work within the system to express how concerned people are over some of the decisions they have made about potentially preempting state consumer protection decisions. And I feel like what I hear on my end is like a renewed effort to try to get the people who run the compact to try to realize that states need more room to effectuate the will of their constituents, of their students, of their citizens. And I feel like that is also something short of dropping out that I think is something worthwhile, which is talking about how, whatever comes out of the task force on these issues, I obviously firmly believe you guys have the ability to run with, and I think trying to make more room within the compact for states to utilize their authorities under their higher education law and other laws is critically important. I think there's some really disturbing things we're hearing about is the ability to use state consumer protection statutes to crack down on authorities and whether or not those are preempted by the compact, which I think are of grave concern. I think on the next question, I think it's absolutely right. I think what we've seen in the past is how these schools are able to just grow exponentially, almost like too big to fail financial institutions. And then at the very last minute, when they explode, the investors, the executives, everyone kind of walks off scot-free, and then there's potentially hundreds of thousands of students holding the bag. So I agree, more enforcement, more ability to hold the schools accountable when they make mistakes, and more ability to kind of crack down on the practices. I think what my presentation also showed is just how so many of the economic incentives are misaligned that allow them to just thrive. There are lenders making loans they know are going to fail, but they're getting paid. And that just continues the spigot of both new students, more federal dollars. So I really do think kind of focusing on the tactics around them can be really, really helpful to try to think about how to kind of limit the growth and exposure of kind of some of the worst schools we've seen.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you both to Casey and Seth for your information and recommendations. There were a few more questions that came in, some related to statistics and data of the EAP and others on policies and cracking down on lead generation. So we'll ask that you follow with these questions after, and we'll get the responses out to the task force members. At this point, we're going to move to a break, and I want to remind everyone moving into the break that this session and all task force meetings are recorded, and that will include your breakout rooms. But we'll be taking an 8-minute break now and ask that you come back to this room at 11:30. So just mute your mics, and if you want, turn off your videos. But please come back to this room at 11:30 so we can talk about the proposed solutions, the work groups, and the worksheet and your morning email. And again, this session is recorded, including this break time. We'll see you back here at 11:30. Give a 1-minute warning. We'll come back in 1 minute. Welcome back from break. I hope everyone had an opportunity to stretch. At this time, in moving forward in our agenda, I will turn the microphone back over to the chair, Secretary Blumenfeld.
Great, thank you, and welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had enough time to refill your coffee cup and use a little bio break. I know we've got a lot packed into these meetings, so thank you for staying so engaged and so with us. We've got a huge assignment here. So you'll see on the screen, we've broken you into 3 groups. Again, you should have all gotten your first choice in terms of the survey that you responded. And we did our best to break up the subject matter topics as well. We will be breaking into these groups in just a little bit. You'll be in this group this week for the balance of this meeting and then the following meeting as well. So it'll be a little bit more intimate than working in the large groups. So if you move to the next slide, we've also broken out the recommendations that have come in into the 3 groups. And again, many of the topics span all 3 groups, so we did our best to kind of bucket them in a way that made reasonable sense and that we could each focus on do a little bit deeper dive and focus more intensely on a smaller group of recommendations that have come in. And you'll see in the bottom left here, there's kind of a legend. So some of the topics where we've talked about them at particular meetings, we've noted that like meeting 4 or meeting 3 or meeting 5 or some are meeting 6 because we haven't, which is the next meeting, and we haven't gotten to it yet. You can look at your notes or the PowerPoint slides or any background material if you're super interested in that particular topic, try to give you a sense of where we discussed it. You'll also see that some of them say solution summary, and that's where our team is trying to just provide a 1 to 2 page summary of what this topic is all about. And it's just one data point. Many of these topics are being implemented in a variety of ways in a variety of states, and some are state-specific solutions, some are done through institutions or private parties. So we just wanted to give you some additional background because as you can see, we have 33 proposals at this point. So that's including ones that we've done the solution summaries. And then in the survey, many of you offered to write solutions. So the ones that were identified in the survey, you'll see it says additional solutions summary. And what that means is that it's a new topic that a task member or third party is writing for submission and consideration. And so some of those are written at this point. Some of those are not completed. The deadline is next week, and we'll cover that part in just a minute. But this is how we divided it up. We're trying to give you some background information or direction regarding each of the topics. And many of you are experts in this field and can provide background. And we're really looking forward to that during the discussion part of our topic. So if you move to the next slide, if you're like me, I'm like, where do I begin? This is so much information and it can feel a little bit overwhelming. So what we've tried to do here, and I'll just say this is, I want to say this up front so that no one gets scared that you have to turn this in. You don't. We've created a worksheet that you can use for your own purposes to kind of think through the different proposals. And you'll see down the left side are the names of the different proposals. So we've broken them up into the 3 buckets. So there's approximately 10 in each bucket, 10 or 11. And you'll see the names along the left side of the worksheet. And this was provided in the information that was sent prior to the meeting today. And across the top, the first 6 columns are really things that we as a task force have been charged with in the executive. So this is what the governor has asked us to think about in looking and evaluating the different proposals. So this is a little bit of a rubric for you to think about, like as we're talking through the different options, you might think, okay, well, I really like this one because it eases student loan management, or it improves economic outcomes. And you can just simply make a check there. You can make notes. You can use this document or not use it, because again, you're not turning it in any way that is helpful to you. But we tried to just provide you with a little bit of a worksheet to try and keep all of these straight. And then the column, the third from the right, is lift. And I think it's important too, as we put forth recommendations to the government, to the governor, what is the lift involved in this particular recommendation? And we just said light, medium, and heavy. And in the instructions, you'll see we have a little bit of a descriptor on that. But light might be something that, hey, we could do right now. It really doesn't cost any money. It's not big on resources. It's something pretty, pretty easy to do that would be effective. A medium might take a little bit of more of a resource commitment. It may or may not take, legislation, but there might be like heavy bipartisan support and something that could move rather quickly through the legislative process, executive order, etc. And heavy is something that is complicated and requires a lot of startup costs, a lot of resources up front. It requires, legislation. It will have to go through, it might be more controversial, more political. And there's no right or wrong as to how to categorize there. But I think it's important that we think about that. And ultimately, at the end, our goal, as we talked about, one of the success points is creating this body of knowledge that the state can use to help alleviate the student debt crisis in our state, right? So we're creating this body of knowledge. So all 33 of these recommendations really evolve into that body of knowledge that we're going to create. Through the report and our task force, what we'd like to do is narrow these down and present 6 of the top ones that this task force feels most passionately about, that the state needs to look at to help alleviate the student debt problem in our state. We will put those top 6, you'll think, in the front half of the recommendations as consideration for the governor. But really, this whole body of work, we're gonna turn in everything so that there is one place people can go to in the state to see all these recommendations. Because while the governor may pick some of our recommendations to put it forward in the budget or through other vehicles, legislators, we have great legislators on this committee. They may pick up some private institutions, public institutions, employers. There's a lot in these 33 recommendations that anybody in our state can really look at, evaluate, and move forward. So we talked about this at the way beginning, that there was no one proposal, no magic bullet, no one thing that the state was gonna be able to do to really solve the crisis. And as we see, there are so many good ideas here that have been put forward, so thank you. Our end goal is really to come up with the list of 6 that we will put forward to the governor. And to that extent, we'll just revisit our process slide. If you advance forward one. And this is the slide that we looked at last time, and it's just updated a bit as we move forward. So today we are in meeting 5, and the homework, if you will, after we divide into our work groups, is really to use this slide or whatever method you want to really go through and think through the proposals that are in your work group and evaluate one. So we'll go through, kind of set the table today. We'll look at all of them real quickly. We'll do a deep dive into a few of them, a few more of them, probably half today. And then some of you, and that'll be today's work, meeting 5. Between meeting 5 and meeting 6, some of you that have committed to writing proposals, those proposals are due July 14th. So we'd ask that you have those submitted in by July 14th so that we can turn them around and get them to the group before the next meeting, which is July 22nd. And in that meeting, similar to this meeting, we'll have a couple more presentations at the front end, and then we will redivide into our work groups again. We'll discuss the remaining solutions, and then we'll go through a prioritization process at the end so that each work group can come up with the 2 and maybe 3 at most work group proposed solutions. And then we will have our list of, I'll say 6, it might be a few more, even up to 9. And then during meeting 7, which is on August 5th, we'll have representatives from the work groups present the proposals, the top 2 or 3 proposals, to the full group. So I just want to also make the point, if you're in one group and you're passionate about something that's in another group, you will have the opportunity to vote on all of the information in that final meeting 7. So we'll talk through the top 6 to 9 meetings, or 9 proposals in meeting 7 on August 5th, and then we will prioritize those down to the top 6. So we hope to have a healthy and robust discussion during meeting 7. And then between 7 and 8, we will get that draft report ready, and we will spend meeting 8 going through the draft. So obviously not every proposal is going to make it in the top 6, but I do want to assure you that all proposals will be in that final body of knowledge, body of work that we are going to put forth to the governor and will be available for anyone who wants to take action on it. So hopefully that lays out the process for you in a way that you can see how we get from today through the end of this process on August 12th. And I know this is a big ask of all of you. You've been really great in coming to the meetings. I think we've nearly had perfect attendance. And these are long meetings. 3 hours is a long time to sit. I really thank you for that. And I'm going to thank you in advance for the hard work that you're about to do as you look at your work group's proposals. And I'd say get passionate about 1 or 2 of them that you really feel strongly, so that during the discussion, you can be an advocate for that and help provide your expertise that you come to the work group with, and help move the process of winnowing this down, which is very hard, a little bit easier. So I thank you in advance for all the work that you're about to do and that you've done so far. Let's pause and just see if there are questions on the process before we break. We are actually, I'll turn it back over to Michelle in just a bit here. And we will adjourn this meeting. So I think the last time we broke into sessions, we actually all came back to the main session. We're not going to do that this time. We're going to adjourn this meeting and then start in our work group meetings, but Michelle's going to give you the details on that. So let's pause and see if there are questions at this point on the process.
While we're waiting to see if there's questions, I'll throw up the next slide and let those get chatted into the box. So yes, just a reminder, meeting 6 is July 22nd, 10 to 1 on the WebEx is our meeting room again. Any questions you have in between, please send those to the Student Debt Task Force at dfi.wisconsin.gov email address, or please visit the website if you need materials and want to review items. If you can't find an email, everything's being posted there. And feedback about the flow of meetings can certainly be submitted to me or that task force email address as well. Well, all I'm seeing is good explanation of the process, no questions, so that's fabulous. Then we'll move to our next item, as we are very appreciative of your time. So now is the time when we're going to ask you to stay in this room if you are part of the Government, Public, and Private Institution Subsidies and Financing Solutions work group. Otherwise, we will ask that you within the next 3 minutes, so by 11:49, 11:50, depending upon when that clock flips, make sure you move to the Consumer Protection Work Group room, if that's where you are assigned and have chosen to be, or the Borrower Education and Management of Higher Education Expenses. These links were sent to you in your emails and calendar appointments, but leave this meeting so you don't have any technical echoing problems or trying to be in 2 rooms at once, and move yourself to the next meeting room during these next 3 minutes. So again, thank you very much. Final official adjournment will be done by your facilitators at 1 o'clock, and we will now be silent for about 3 minutes as everyone moves about. Thank you.
All right, we'll get started here in just a minute. I think we have everyone, and we have a couple people let's see, Senator Smith, it looks like you are in our breakout room. I have you in the consumer protection room. And I'm wondering if Jeff Burrant is here. Or a representative. Okay, otherwise I see all of you. And if anyone is willing to turn their camera on for this smaller group discussion, I encourage it. I know it's always like, oh, do I have to turn it on? But I think it's nice for the smaller group. So welcome to this is a big title, Government, Public and Private Institutions, Subsidies and Financing Solutions. So it's a mouthful here. We are fortunate to have a few people behind the scenes who are helping us today. So Catherine Haberland is here and she is helping us scribe. So she'll be chatting in the remarks as they come about. And we have Cody Kastorf, who is helping us. You've heard his voice before. He's the master of WebEx behind the scenes. He's like the wizard. We love having him on our team. So as we break into the smaller group, I also want to call out that we have a resource here, Jack Porter. So Jack, I see you over there. Thank you for being here. Jack was a presenter in prior meetings and really is an all-around expert in the area of student debt. So we have him on the line too, so that he can help also set the table in terms of background on different topics or answer questions or just help us as a background resource. So for the members, the task force members, and I also realize we have others on the call as well, but just real quick, I think it'd be really helpful since we've been in these big meetings and we'll be spending some time together in the smaller meeting. Just if we can just do a real quick roll call just to remind people what you do, what your background is, and you know, how you're representing the task force here. I think it'll be really helpful. So I don't know if Jeff has joined the call. I don't see him, but not always are the descriptors accurate. But Derek, why don't you just introduce yourself again?
Hi, everyone. My name is Derek Campbell. I work in the Office of the Governor as a policy advisor, working mostly on education policy as well as economic development and workforce development. Great.
And Shannon, we just heard from you, but I know you're out there.
What we want to do is mitigate our overall risk and then not come back and have a clawback where they're like, well, you service people outside of your CHASA or your FMAP, and now you owe that money back. I guess that's sort of the thing. So I don't know, do we err on the side of caution and not offer it or whatever? Because there is some thought to that. Like because we're going to do it like this.
Cody, if you could pause. Okay, great. I know she's there because we saw her earlier, but we'll come back to her. Paul? Oh, hold on one sec. Okay, try again.
Can you hear me?
Now we can. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about that. Haven't used the button in a long time today, so I forgot where it was here. Anyways, I'm Paul Kunert. I'm the president and CEO of the UW Credit Union. We're a Wisconsin-based financial institution, a credit union with about $4 billion in assets. We are one of the largest private student lenders in the state of Wisconsin to Wisconsin students. We've been in the student lending business for many decades, but in the private student lending business for just over 15 years. We think we're a good actor in the space. We have very low defaults, reasonable loan limits. We've never lent money for the attendance at for-profit schools. And we've provided a lot of counseling to students. I'm a strong advocate for consumer protection, and I worked with the Department of Ed several years ago to help introduce protections on student campus banking relationships that ended up being codified by the Department of Ed. So that's why I'm here, provide expertise in matters related to lending, I guess, and private lending.
Great, thank you. And next we have Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Larson. I'm the Senior Vice President for Advocacy at the Wisconsin Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, and that represents the 24 private nonprofit colleges and universities throughout the state. And I do all policy work for the organization on behalf of our institutions. And I also wanted to mention when there was this discussion of NC Sarah, Dr. Rolf Yankee, who's the president of WACU, as we call ourselves, is also the chair of the Distance Learning Authorization Board. So that's the state portal entity for NC Sarah in Wisconsin. And that's an incredibly complicated issue and organization. So if there's ever a desire to get some more information on, Wisconsin's participation in SARA and policies related to that, we're happy to contribute.
Very good. Thank you, Rebecca. And next up, we have Shane.
Hi, I'm Shane Maloney. I've been filling in for Derek Kindle. I'm from the Office of Student Financial Aid at UW-Madison, and I'm the Associate Director for Federal Awards. So kind of within our wheelhouse is all things Title IV administration, which includes direct loan. We have private loan borrowing kind of in our repertoire. We also deal with the fund management of campus. So anything that has to do with the promise programs and things like that, that really goes through our team.
Very good. And then we have Mike Madursky, who is driving, I know.
I'm here. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
I didn't want to put my camera on because otherwise everybody's going to get seasick with the car bouncing on.
Probably good. We want you to be safe.
Yeah. So I'm Mike, was president at Holland State Bank, a local community bank here in Madison. We recently merged with officer for the combined institution. Oregon Community Bank is now a $1.5 billion bank with locations all around Madison. Have two kids in college that have gone through the process, the student loan process. So here to try to help out from a finance, much like Paul, from a finance banking aspect.
Very good. Thank you. And do drive safely, please. Mike Rosen.
Oh. Muted?
Now we can. Yep.
You got me? Okay. I currently am the director of the FAST Fund, which stands for Faculty and Students Together, which is a nonprofit organization that provides emergency assistance to Milwaukee area technical college students. Last year, we awarded 297 students emergency grants. By far, the single largest thing was around evictions and rent, and that's continuing right now. I also served when I was employed at MATC, which I retired after 29 years, I was on the president's committee that established the Promise program. One of my concerns is that, and what I'd like to see addressed is essentially the entire cost of college. Because what we have, what I see we have is that students get Pell Grants, especially the low-income students, primarily who I'm dealing with. They get Pell Grants, they take out loans, they are working, which cuts into sometimes their Pell Grants because they can only go to school part-time, and they get trapped in taking out more loans to get an education. The Promise program that we have at MATC is a last dollar program that simply covers tuition. Then students can't pay for books or housing or transportation or now computers and internet service. So I hope that this committee can think very broadly about what we can do, not just in terms of financial literacy, but in terms of actually making the cost of college more reasonable so that low income and particularly students of color who is primarily who I'm dealing with can actually afford to pursue a higher education.
Great. Thank you, Mike. And we will be talking about Promise program, so I want you to chime in. wholeheartedly at that. Great. And then last but certainly not least, Alex Shade.
Happy Wednesday. I am Alexandra Shade. You can refer to me as Alex. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I oversee CUNY Mutual Group's corporate social responsibility, which includes our foundation, also includes our volunteer program and employee engagement, as well as our sustainability and community relations. I know one of the upcoming meetings we're going to be discussing is how CUNY Mutual has a fantastic partnership with Vault, which is focused on helping our employees reduce their student debt levels. And I think that's really exciting that as a company that is focused on the end goal of ensuring that a brighter financial future can be and should be accessible to all, that's also something that we're doing internally.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate it. And thanks to all of you. So again, big picture here, our goal is to take the 11 proposals that have been put forth to our subgroup, which Catherine chatted in the chat. So instead of having a slide up, I thought it was better during these small group discussions to have our faces up so that we can see each other and maybe pretend we're not virtual for a moment. So what we'll do first is just walk through the 11 and do kind of a quick, what do we think this is type of thing. And then we're going to circle back and do a deeper dive into about half of them today and then the other half tomorrow. And again, we've got solution summaries for some of these that were sent out ahead of time. Not all of them are complete. Some are being done by third parties. It's not the end all be all. Like Mike said earlier, when you're talking about promise programs, it can mean 100 different things in 100 different ways it's implemented. So we're trying to provide you with some high level overviews, but you guys can come in with your own expertise and add to that. And we welcome that during these discussions because it's really hard to be an expert on everything. And just a reminder, speaking of experts, we do have Jack here too. So Jack, please feel free to chime in and know that we can ask Jack for questions. And if he doesn't have the answer, he's awesome about following up and getting it. And we really appreciate all the support that he's been giving us. So let's look at the 11. The first one is the Badger clawback. And we've not had a presentation on that one. That came in through a third party. It was a fellow named Andy Gronick who had put this forward last year. And you will get a solution summary sent out to you on this, but I just want to describe kind of the thought behind it. It's a program that would help Wisconsin recruit and retain college graduates by helping them pay down their student debt. And the plan works like this. New graduates employed in Wisconsin for at least 6 months of uninterrupted full-time employment would be eligible to apply 100% of their state income tax due that year and all years following when they are employed full-time. So they can take their state income tax due and apply that to the repayment of their student debt until their debt is completely paid off. So that's a unique solution, a unique Wisconsin solution. It's called the Badger clawback. You'll receive a solution summary on that. You can look at it, but it's not something that has had airtime during one of our meetings so far. So I just wanted to call that one out. The next one is employer-sponsored assistant to repay student loans. And so there are a lot of creative programs going on right now where employers are helping their employees pay down their student debt. And there was a company, Abbott, was kind of a pioneer in this area where they were helping provide kind of matching and assistance to their employees. And they had a private ruling letter from the IRS, which has opened the door for more and more organizations to really recognize that their employees, it's like an employee benefit. It's a talent attraction tool. It's financial peace of mind, so financial benefits. There's so many reasons to do this. And so this, in meeting 6, as Alex alluded to, we are going to share CUNY Mutual's work that they're doing, and they've partnered also with a company called Vault. And they're going to share both the program Vault, but also kind of the employer perspective of why they feel it's been so important and so beneficial to offer this assistance to their employees. So that's coming up here in just a minute. The next one, Rebecca, is, I might point to you on this one because I think this was the one that you wrote in that you were suggesting, but increases in targeted student financial aid. Do you want to talk for a minute about what you plan to produce for the group?
Sure, yeah. We are going to talk about this just a little bit more going forward with others as well, but particularly because of the health pandemic and situations that we're finding students and families in, we're already getting a lot of requests just for additional support because of what's their family situation has changed and the student's financial situation has changed. So at the federal level and in several congressional committee discussions, there's been talk about doubling of the Pell Grant. And I know that's, optimistic, but it really does speak to the need that the students are facing right now. So our thinking was something along that line of just increasing the maximum grant amount for students, because the more that we can provide to them in state aid and federal aid and then institutional aid can really help to reduce the amount of loans that they have to take out. So that's the thinking behind it.
Very good, thank you. And that also speaks a little to what Mike brought up earlier about the total cost of college as well, just a little different way. The next topic is loan forgiveness programs, and we've seen those, we've heard a few of those in different presenters. Obviously, there's a wide variety of doing those, and it could be, as we heard today, to target, specific vulnerable communities. It could be to incent people to go into specific professions or to work in specific areas of the state. There's a lot of variety in this, but setting up something probably parallel to the public service loan forgiveness program, are there things that could be a win-win for the state, where it helps not only the state fill a need and a void, it helps people, and it helps also incentivize people to go to do fulfill whatever that need is. So it's a very broad bucket, but be curious as we do a deeper dive what ideas you would all have for that. The next one is the Promise program, and here we have many post-secondary institutions, states, and localities have created a Promise program, which either allows students to attend college for free. It can be a first dollar, last dollar, again, lots and lots of, it's like 31 flavors of them. Mike, do you want to give just a quick high level of some of the different varieties that you've seen in the Promise program? And we'll come back and do a deeper dive, but just a little bit more background would be helpful.
So I think the most prominent one in Wisconsin is what we call a last dollar program. And that is that it essentially fills any gap between federal, the Pell Grant and other forms like the Wisconsin Higher Education Grant. And it's just for tuition. And the problem that I've seen with that, which is what I mentioned earlier, is that it only covers tuition. And so other costs like book costs, as everybody knows, are exceedingly expensive. And now computers or laptops aren't covered. But it's a last dollar, so it's the cheapest, and that's what MATC has and many other schools. There is a first dollar program, and I'm not clear yet if anybody has implemented that. I think there's some attempts in some states, and that is where the state is actually funding, and it's much more expensive. The state is actually funding the tuition, and then Pell Grants are used to cover the other costs of college. So that's a first dollar promise program. And then there's a middle promise program, which is where the tuition is covered plus $1,000 or $1,000 or $2,000. Now at MATC, one of the things that we had discussed, and I retired from there and I'm not involved in it anymore, but when we recognized the problem that existed with only covering tuition and then students not being able to pay for books and other things, we talked about a modified middle program where, in addition to tuition, students would be given some kind of $500 a semester stipend or $250. I don't know if they implemented that or not.
Okay, thank you. And
that's
that's
middle.
helpful. And then Shane or Jack, I don't know if you want to add to that just from your experiences.
Yeah, so when we created Bucky's tuition promise, we noticed that a lot of the students that fell within the certain range that we were looking at were mostly already covered with financial aid. Their tuition was already covered with financial aid, gift aid in general. So what we did is the Bucky's tuition promise was really like Mike said, a cheaper option for us to say, okay, now anybody below this AGI or income range we can tell you that that's going to happen. One of the things we've done since the inception of Bucky's Tuition Promise is kind of introduce a Bucky's Tuition Promise Plus if you want to upgrade the subscription or something like, I don't know. But we looked at the people who were eligible for Bucky's Tuition Promise and were also Pell eligible and did more than just tuition. We met all the way up to their full need. And that's a commitment program as well for 4 years. The nice thing about promise programs is it kind of gives students and families the opportunity to say, I know what the next 4 years is going to look like, which is really helpful.
Very good. Thank you. And Jack, anything to add?
Sure. Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add here with regards to the first dollar or last dollar nature is that I think that arguably the most prominent criticism that last dollar programs has received has been on the issue of equity. Because if you think about it, right, a last dollar program, which, you know, in my view, fills in the gap between what you receive from a federal grant and what your cost of attendance is for tuition. And so oftentimes the lowest income students who receive a maximum Pell Grant, which is about $6,000, have their tuition covered by federal dollars and are therefore ineligible for the state resources. Right. And so sometimes these programs that are, again, what I would say is the most prominent criticism they've received is they're not the best, that they could be targeted better to provide assistance to students who are receiving a full Pell Grant because they're low income, and the state resources are going towards students who got, you know, less than a full Pell Grant and therefore, you know, have maybe middle income. And the only thing I'd add to that is that, you know, as I think Mike touched on, the cost of attendance is far more than just tuition dollars, right? There's often students who miss out on these last dollar programs, have expenses like childcare and transportation and other things of that nature. And so I think that, you know, that's just, you know, from my standpoint, you know, arguably the most prominent criticism of last dollar programs is the issue of equity.
Very good. And again, we'll come back and dive a little deeper into these, but that's helpful in terms of setting the table. The next one is Refinancing Authority. And so we had the Rhode Island folks come, the treasurer and the head of the Refinancing Authority come and talk to us about probably one of the most established ones in the country. That's certainly something that we can consider here as well. Probably one of the bigger lifts, but really what that is going to do is create a financing facility that would where people would be able to refinance their federal student loans, ideally at a lower interest rate. So that is there are also opportunities to maybe partner with existing refinance facilities in other states. So there's a nexus rule, and most of them have nexus where some you have to live in the state, some you don't have to live in the state. And there's a lot of pros and cons. This would be probably one of the larger lifts when we think about lifts within our recommendations, because it does take quite a bit of capital upfront to start a refinancing authority. But it also could provide relief to borrowers by having a lower interest rate. Another side of it is also that once you refinance, you lose all the protections that a federal, loan can carry with it, unless you stand behind those protections and design a program that would be similar. So I'll open it up to anyone who wants to. Just a couple comments on refinancing authorities. I've tried to take a very large thing and squeeze it into a very short amount of time. All right, hearing none, we'll circle back to that one. The next one is rural opportunity zones, and this is something that was done in the state of Kansas. And it's, I think there are a few other potential ones, but many situations in many states where you have rural urban, situations where it's really hard to get specific people to move into and practice whatever their profession is, whether it's teaching, being a veterinarian, being a doctor, being a lawyer, being, whatever the healthcare worker is, kind of creating programs that incentivize people to work in those professions, to live in the state. It's also a talent retention strategy for people and using tax credits in order to incentivize people to do those jobs in those particular rural opportunity zones. And Jack, help me out here if I didn't quite say that correctly.
No, you got it. The only thing that I would add is that the program in Kansas requires you to have a sponsor, either from your employer or from your county, to match the state resources that are getting put into those programs. And the two kind of benefits, as you mentioned, Secretary Blumenfeld, are either direct forgiveness with student or direct assistance with repaying your student loans, or having part of your income tax waived. So there's kind of two-pronged approaches to that.
Great, thank you. The next one is a recommendation put forth by Kevin McShane, and he'll be doing a proposal on that. And it's called Strategic Use of State Grant Aid to Reduce Student Debt Challenges. And so, Rebecca, I don't know how much this overlaps your proposal as well, or if they're going to be very different.
I will connect with Kevin on this. He and I did talk about this a little bit, and we actually have a meeting with all of our financial aid directors on Friday. So I think we'll be able to sort of narrow in, and I'll connect with him on it.
Okay. And just keep us posted if you're gonna collaborate and do one proposal, or if you have different ideas, you're certainly welcome to do separate ones as well. Just let us know so that we can make sure we update our information as we go forward.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Sure. The next one is student loan asset-backed securities, or SLABs. Jack, you're going to have to help me on this. I know it's, securities that are backed by, so you kind of collect up student loans, securitize them, and create a marketable security that is backed by student loans. Do you have more that you can share?
This is a concept that I'm a little bit less familiar with. When I saw the list of what we'd be discussing today, I saw SLABs, and I wasn't sure what that was, but I haven't come across this in any of the work that I've done at NGA, but I'm happy to follow up and put something together that could be helpful for the group.
Thank you. And I don't mean to put you on the spot as well. And it's impossible. As you can see, the breadth of what we're covering is so large. Does anyone here on the call have experience with SLABs? Paul, are you talking? Because let's see, your mute is on. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Now I can. Yep, thanks.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Well, my understanding is the Rhode Island model actually did use slabs type funding structure in that they sold bonds from the state authority into the securities markets, and they were collateralized by the loans themselves that the state authority had done. So I'm assuming this is a subtype of a refinance authority type structure, but is actually passing the credit risk on to the bondholders rather than having the state put its own credit at risk. That's my speculation on what's meant by that, but others may have more clarity on it.
Great. We'll get more information on it. That does make sense intuitively. That would seem like a good way to mitigate risk for a state that is doing the refinancing. But we'll get some more information on that as well. Tax credits, we're talked about a little bit in meeting number 3, and we've a couple of these other recommendations kind of touch on that as well, whether it's like the Badger clawback or the loan forgiveness or the opportunity zone. It's just a mechanism that the state can use to help support, either by putting a credit on a Wisconsin tax return that would leave more money for someone to pay down their student debt with the money they were going to pay to the state. I think there's some organized facilities that actually take that money and pay down the debt to make sure it actually gets paid down, because you can imagine if someone gets a $200 credit on a tax return, are they really going to take that $200 and use it to pay down their debt? So I think there's some more robust programs that actually make the payment for the borrower. But I think there's a lot of creative ways in which tax credits can be used. So I'll pause a minute if anyone has anything to add to tax credits. All right, and then the final proposal that we received was from a company named Savvy, and they will actually be also presenting at our meeting number 6, and they're doing a lot of technology integration platforms within student debt, and they've got 4 different ways in which the state might be able to partner with them to help provide guidance to people with student debt. But during the COVID, for example, during the COVID situation right now, similar to the hotline I talked about earlier, they're providing guidance to people with student debt, making sure, we've heard so many time and again that people don't know what, what plan they're in or their loans are in, whether they're in a standard repayment plan or an income-driven repayment plan. They do a lot of guidance to help borrowers make sure that they're in the right program for them, and they do that through call centers. They also do it through technology, through an app, and then they also go farther, especially in the public loan service for public loan service forgiveness programs. Did I say that right? All my acronyms are messing up my brain right now. But they will help with the compliance aspect. So when we've heard that only like 1% make it through to actually get that loan forgiveness, they actually will help the borrower through the process to make sure that they have that compliance every year, and can also intervene with the servicers to make sure that where they said they've been successful in getting credit for past work that has already been done. So we had a borrower come and share their story, how they were a teacher and didn't realize they were in the wrong plan, and then switched the plan but lost service for those prior years. They've been successful in actually going back and getting some credit for that. So they're going to share that with us in our next meeting. So those are the 11 kind of proposals that we have forward. I'll pause just a minute to make sure if anyone has any questions as we kind of set the table on those. We've got about 35 minutes left. Then we'll do a deeper dive into a few of them. So again, I'll pause for a minute. Sorry, I always say that I'll pause and then I start talking. So I'm going to pause.
Listen, Michael, I just have one question. I had said I was going to write something, which two things that would fit into this committee, and then a third that fits into another committee. And how does that work? If you
So are your two on here right now?
yeah,
Okay.
one will be on refinancing and one is on the Promise program.
Okay. So I guess what I'd say is for that third one, since it's impossible to be in two places, maybe you just
Right.
send a note that the facilitator can read on your behalf for that meeting, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's
Or if you feel really strongly and compelled, we can arrange for you to, spend 2/3 of your time here and bop over there, however you want to handle it. Otherwise, at the final, when we have the top 6 and are voting on, if it's one of those, you can make a passionate plea at that point in time. So I'll let you decide how you want to handle that. Good question.
Okay.
Anything else? Paul.
I have a question, Kathy, about about the solutions proposals, or how the discussion could evolve to a refined proposal. For example, when you talk about in the sphere of refinancing authorities, well, one approach could be to try to reduce borrowing costs for the most credit challenged borrowers. And it could involve state subsidizing rates for those that are credit challenged. But my question, I guess, is if that concept isn't included in the proposal for a state refinancing, can it emerge from our work, or do we need to be submitting to the sphere of, the universe of possibilities, those kind of concepts? I'm just, from a process standpoint, I just want to understand, is that necessarily need to be a proposal, or could our discussion result in those kind of refinements?
I'd say to the extent if there's something like that you're thinking about that's really a key component that's not in the 11, we'd probably want to get it on our list today and have you or whoever is passionate about that filling it out. It's not that it can't happen, but it'll get more credibility if it could be Refinancing Authority version 2.0. We'll have a couple on refinance authorities. So if it's got a specific flavor that you feel really strongly about, I'd really like you to put it in as a proposal, if that's okay.
Okay, that's helpful. Since we haven't seen the other proposals, it wasn't clear whether that's duplicative or. But if you're encouraging us to submit those ideas up front in a standalone proposal.
I think if it's different enough, and again, you can do it on 1 page or less, like you don't have to do a big thing. You could say Refinancing Authority and just focus on that one piece. I think, and the other reason is I don't want things to get lost in discussion. Again, we're kind of creating this body of knowledge. And so if that's something really critical, a really critical component, because that would be a program in of itself almost, that we get it out there formally. Does that make sense? It's not that it can't happen the other way, because some of these do overlap and they may kind of coalesce into like 3 things coming forward as one proposal, but that's not really on the table. So I'd like to get that on the table if that's something you're passionate about.
Okay, thanks.
So if you could just let us know by the end of the day if you're going to do that, it'd be you don't have to have it completed. They're due next week, but if your plan is to do that, let us know. Okay. And it would be within this group, so we all know it would be coming.
Yeah, I understand. Thanks.
Good. Does anyone else have any questions like that or on process? I actually paused that time.
Listen, Michael,
yes.
It's not so much about process, but we can have aspirational proposals or we can have pragmatic proposals. And I'm wondering, what if there's been any thought about that? In other words, how valuable is it to put forward a proposal that might not be viable at this time, given the pandemic and state finances or political alignment, but that is a good proposal versus maybe something more modest that maybe has some more opportunity through executive action or whatever?
So both. I think we want both. We absolutely want pragmatic ones because people are hurting, and we also want to prevent the next generation from, having an average of $30,000 of student debt. So we definitely want pragmatic. But on the other hand, we're also creating this body of knowledge that hopefully will span many years that people can pick up. And when times change and things look different, there'll be one place to go to for all these considerations and kind of harnessing all the intellect and the experience that all of you bring to the table, that maybe someone won't, the governor at that point in time won't have to call a task force, or the legislature won't have a study committee on this, because they'll be able to at least pick up some of the things that we're leaving on the table. So yes to practical ones for sure, and yes to aspirational ones, because I think it's also a legacy for the future, and as things evolve, and they will in our state, that those opportunities are heard. Fair enough? All right, let's dive in. Let's do a deeper dive, and I think we'll start with, let's take Refinancing Authority. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments. Is it practical? Is it aspirational? Would it be beneficial? What are the pros and cons of doing a refinancing authority? And Catherine will be chatting in some of the comments that we hear, and you're also welcome to chat in as well. Derek?
Yeah, so I guess one thing that I wanted to see and say and kind of pose to the group was, I know personally the governor is pretty interested in just a further exploration of state-run student loan refinancing authority. In his 1921 budget, he had created a student loan refinancing study committee, which was removed, just to see how, I know at the onset of this, we talked about how heavy of a lift it is. And so I guess that exploration was to see, how heavy a lift it actually is. I thought through our presentation so far, it was super interesting, especially going back to that Rhode Island presentation. Rhode Island Student Loan Authority, it covered a broad swath of recommendations that this task force has on not only this bucket of topics, but also other ones. I mean, they offered assistance through FAFSA. They help facilitate that employee-sponsored repayment assistance. So they had front-end help as well as back-end help as well. I'm super glad that Jack Porter's on, because also diving into that, actually, I'll save that portion for when we talk about the employer-sponsored repayment assistance. But yeah, I do think it is something that is interesting to talk about, and I'd love to hear more from the group on that.
I would comment on it a little bit, Kathy. I want to say too that student lending refinancing, even though go ahead.
Go ahead.
What? Sorry, Paul, you have the floor. Someone must not have their, Cody, yeah, okay. I think we're good now, Paul.
All right, thanks. Well, I would just like to comment that, the student loan refinancing is a service that is being delivered in the marketplace in Wisconsin by more than a dozen Wisconsin-based community lenders. In addition, there are national money center banks and other fintech type companies that are offering refinance opportunities to Wisconsin residents. The market is fairly competitive, especially for those with the best credit. And I think that, in fact, we heard with the Rhode Island presenter that they're loaning to no one with a credit score lower than 680, a FICO score. And actually, my understanding is that most of the balance sheet lenders in Wisconsin are helping provide services to a greater range of credit borrowers. But interest rates in student lending are driven by just a number of things. They're driven by what the funding costs of the lender are. And so the question is, does the state borrow money and can relend it at lower rates than federally insured depositories? The answer is probably not, because our funding costs, because our deposits are federally insured, are going to be similar, if not better, to what state bonding would provide. They're also driven by the expectation of credit losses. And so this is where I think there is an opportunity, or I think there's an opportunity, is that the people that need the greatest relief are not those with great credit. They're those who are struggling with student debt that have less than A credit, and they're paying the highest borrowing costs because lenders have empirical models that suggest the loss experiences would be higher. So, and then also another factor of the interest rates is the margin that lenders expect to cover their operating costs. And that would be the same whether you were a state agency, a state authority, or a private lender. And the margin is not as great as you imagine in the banking business. A 1% margin reflects a fairly competitive marketplace. So where the delta is, where the opportunity is, it's the expected credit losses that are out there. And so, you know, we heard in the Rhode Island model, the commentator said that they were turning down about 30% of the applications they got for student loan refinancing. I believe they said they only had ever had 3 student loans default from the Refinance Authority. Being in the banking business, what that reflects to me is they're really not extending credit to the people that are paying the most for credit, which are those with less than A credit. So the opportunity to me is there a way that the state could use resources to come in and partner with lenders to try to lower the borrowing costs for those that are struggling the most, which have less than perfect credit, and do it in a way where the lenders have skin in the game to manage the credit losses and yet help borrowers enjoy a lower repayment rate. That's, to me, a real opportunity that's out there, is to stimulate private lenders to be able to extend credit more affordably to people that don't have perfect credit. And what I do fear a little bit is if we don't approach it correctly, I asked the Rhode Island presenter about this, but we didn't have time to get to the answer, is does the state authority bring more competition for refinancing to the marketplace, or does it tend to have private lenders leave the state? And if that's the case, what I worry about is less credit flowing and less affordably to people below the A credit tier. So I think it should be a goal that we're bringing more credit availability for refinancing at better rates for those below A credit. A credit people, there's a lot of competition to refinance their loans. I don't think the state will find its resources can do much to lower those costs, but what about the borrowers that don't have perfect credit? The other thing that's at play here too is the federal government, subsequent to 2013, actually started offering more competitive rates to undergraduate borrowers. And so there's an opportunity here for those pre-2013 to really refinance and get to rates that help them repay, get more payment going to principal rather than interest. But subsequent to 2013, there aren't going to be as great of refinancing opportunities because the federal government did act to provide more rate competitive market reflecting rates to borrowers. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you. Good ads there. I think Mike Madursky was trying to speak. So Mike, would you like to go next? And for those that have your camera on, if you want to speak, just raise your hand. I can see you and I'll call on you too. Or you can use the raise your hand feature in the participant section, but since it's a smaller group, it's just easy to raise. Mike, you're not on video, but if you'd like to speak next.
Yeah, I just chatted. I was gonna. Paul stole my whole thunder, so I echo exactly what he says. I think that's my authority. I'd be worried about, you know, private lenders actually leaving the system rather than adding. And I think Paul's absolutely right. I mean, I think the issue is really going to be trying to find those solutions for the lower credit score people as well. So anyway, so I'll get off, but Paul said it exactly what I was thinking. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Anyone else on the topic of refinancing? I'm not seeing. Jack.
Sure. I think both Paul and Mike have made some really, really good points, and I would echo all of that, especially with, you know, the competition in the private market and the very low federal interest rate right now. You know, that's a trend that, like I think Paul mentioned, we've saw, you know, after 2013, when I think it started to get, when the federal student loan interest rate started getting tied to the 10-year note, as opposed to just having a steady 6.8% interest rate. There have been other states that have done reports on this to see what the feasibility would be for their individual state. And what I think you could point out for, a pro on this issue for the state of Wisconsin is that it would avoid at least some startup costs, I think, because of the infrastructure that's already in place at the AIDS board, given that there are existing student lending programs right now. I think there's a nursing loan program, and I believe there's one other one. So having that infrastructure, other state reports found, is critical to getting a refinancing authority in place. The last thing I would say on this is just, again, to maybe bring it back to equity. And Paul's touched very well on how, it's easier to reach borrowers with great credit. The only other thing that I would add is that borrowers who are struggling the most are those with relatively low loan balances who took out some debt and don't have a college degree. And so the amount that they stand to benefit from refinancing their loans is relatively small compared to someone who maybe has a graduate degree, has 6 figures in debt, and their whole balance will be shifted from a lower interest rate. And so just from an equitable standpoint, and making sure that state resources are going to those who need it most, there's also that sort of lens. And again, is probably one of the most prominent pieces of criticism that refinancing authorities have had is the issue of equity as well. Secretary Blumenthal, I think you're on mute.
What, Paul, can you hear me?
Yeah. I just want to follow up and say I agree with what Jack just said, and that one of the most troubling things to me that we've heard about as a task force is the amount of debt accumulated in smaller amounts, but in the first year of attendance where there was no completion. And I'm not sure what the solutions are, but to me, that's one of the most troubling aspects we've learned about. The higher dollar amount loans for graduate students, even though we prefer people not have to borrow at those levels, most of them make the debt service because of the higher incomes they have. But the person that never qualified for increased income through skills or the degree, certificate completion, they struggle the most, and I'm not sure how to. And as Jack said, it's really not interest rates that are affecting them because the amount is fairly small, but yet it's a very troubling position for them to be in. I don't know if it's solved through lending authority or some other method, but I don't think we have a solution on the table yet for them in any of the groups and I think that is a real significant problem.
So I think there's a few proposals that do touch that. One would be like loan counseling, loan ombudsman, someone that at least that is a trusted partner that's not selling anything that people can go to, at least for counseling, to make sure that they are in the right program. Are they are they in a standard program? Have they defaulted? How do they get back on track? Consumer protection. So I think there's a bucket of things in both consumer protection and loan ombudsman that would help them. There's also, we have a general bucket for loan forgiveness. I'm not sure if that's what anyone is advocating or not. Okay. But for those very small dollar loans that are, impeding life for those people, there's some other options. And probably embedded in a lot of different things is some targeted, relief. But I'll open it up to the group for more comments. I think, Rebecca, were you going to say something? And then Mike?
Yeah, and I do think that's an overarching sort of policy discussion that has to do with like persistence and retention. We had a discussion about advising students throughout their college career. And so I think that in, the UW system, WACU, and the Tech College system have developed a 64 attainment goal that has a lot of those persistence and retention policies in them. And, what you had mentioned is, there is just a lot of confusion among borrowers, and the ombudsman idea might be a good way to address that. So I think those students that, drop out with and then have those loan balances without having the credential is really a whole more holistic approach discussion in how we address persistence and retention for those students as well.
Mike, and then Shane, you looked like you were maybe going to chip in. So Mike, and then Shane.
One comment and a question. The comment is that this last issue that's being discussed about retention, if we don't deal with the cost of college, the students that we're dealing with at Milwaukee Area Technical College, you're not going to retain them. I don't care how many advisors and how many counselors you have, how many pathways you have. People are dropping out because they are being evicted because they got to take care of their kids. And that goes to the other issue, the cost of college. But I just feel compelled to make that point that it's not simply a retention of better systems of retention. There's economics involved in this. And I see it every day in the students that are coming to us. I did want to ask a question, which is what is when the refinance rates that highly rated borrowers are getting, what is that rate that banks are providing?
Paul, is that one you could answer?
Well, I'd have to give a range because they're changing based on market conditions. But we heard, I think you could find variable rate loans from as low as 2% right now, and fixed rate loans probably as low as 4.5%. And but they'll go up by the credit tier. Those would be the rates for A borrowers, and they go up significantly. I think to over 10% for those in the lower credit tiers. And again, that's to me where there's an opportunity to help to try to subsidize or to try to bring down the borrowing costs for those folks.
Thank you. Shane?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Rebecca and Michael about the retention issue. I think a lot of the retention we see is based on cost. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the fact that students and families aren't aware of what the next step is in a lot of cases, where it's just giving them that sense of security and this kind of goes back to the promise programs and knowing that there's a sense of commitment going forward. So I think if we can address that cost issue up front and deal with that, I think that could help. Not entirely, but it could help a bit.
Very good. I want to make sure we hear from everyone today, so I'll just invite either Shannon or Alex. I don't think Jeff was able to join us, but if either of you have any discussion or points, please feel free to either chat them in or let me know, and we will have you join the discussion as well, especially on the equity front. I think you both have a lens and a passion for that area.
So this is
Alex.
Yeah, hi, this is Alex. One of the things I was doing was I was going back to my notes, and this percolated up within the presentations that both Shannon and Liz did today too. There seems to be some challenges around those additional monies related to covering the things that aren't tuition based. So whether that's the room, whether that's the board, whether that's the books, whether that's the health insurance, whether that, or I should say any type of health, vision insurance, dental insurance, as well as their living expenses. I've been hearing this from students at Edgewood College, at the UW, at the various MATC, that one of the biggest things that hinders them is not the fact that they can find money, scholarship funding related to the tuition. It's the fact that they cannot find the money and oftentimes have to go and take out loans, or they're working 3 jobs, which then oftentimes or sometimes conflicts with either their on-campus academic schedule. So they wind up missing classes, which then ties back into things that we heard, and I can't remember the name of the two presenters. It was the 2 doctors, the woman and the male, and talking about the challenges related to completing that first semester, and then also then just that first year. And we've seen the research, we've seen the data, that if a young person, a young individual, a young student, or any student can't complete their first year, then we got a big problem on their hand. And that's where they then go into that additional debt. So I like how Paul's been saying, sometimes I don't know what the solution is yet, but I think that it's really important that we address that in this space related to how do we look at these long-term strategies related to the reduction of additional education-related expenses as well. And we know, because the data has shown us, that again, it's our brown and our Black students that are taking on more debt, and they don't have that familial support, as was also then pointed out today by Shannon as well. So I think that's something else that we need to really be thinking about as well.
Good, thank you. And Shannon, I don't know if there's anything you want to contribute.
It appears Shannon just dropped off the call a few minutes ago.
All right, and we obviously heard her voice very loudly in a passionate way earlier today, so that's good. So we have about 6 minutes left. I think we'll move and do one more little deeper dive. And it sounds like we've got 11 now. We might have 12, depending on if Paul wants to craft up a solution. Our end goal by the end of the next meeting is to be able to prioritize and winnow these down for our bucket into the top 2 that we're going to send forward to the full group for consideration. A ton of good ideas. And I think we will dive into just the, let's just take the topic of, let's see, does anyone have, let me ask you guys if there's one that you want to knock off or do a deep dive before we close out here. If you look in the chat box, you have scroll up a little bit, you have the list of 11.
Kathy?
Yes.
I guess one, just since I don't know if we're going to have Jack here next time, one thing when I was going back, through all of our notes and our presentations thus far, when we talked about the employer-sponsored repayment assistance, I believe it was in your presentation, Jack, that mentioned it was a survey in Connecticut, I believe, that 23% of companies are interested in assisting employees repaying student loans. yet only 4% already do, and another 2% are in the process of implementing that. I guess that was kind of just something that piqued my interest when I was going back through things, and I noticed it was one of our topics as well.
Sure. So the survey itself, I think, was a national survey. It wasn't specific to Connecticut. But the law that was passed was in Connecticut. And what it does is it gives employers because what the survey shows is that some employers are already doing this on their own. Some, as a benefit, are offering their employees help with repaying their student loans, which I think is a great way to recruit talent. And what they passed in Connecticut was they're giving tax credits to employers who are offering this as a benefit. And so it's kind of like a business-friendly way to approach this. That said, as I think Secretary Blumenfeld mentioned, there are oftentimes with these programs nexus requirements. And so the bill does require the employee to be working and living in Connecticut to be eligible. The only other thing that I would say here, and I touched on this very briefly in my presentation, is that currently, because of the CARES Act, there is some federal relief that's being provided on this front, and you can contribute student loan assistance as an employer up to $2,500 through the end of this year. It won't hit your payroll tax as an employer, and it won't hit your income tax as an employee. And so maybe in the short term, there's a way to kind of help market that current federal benefit that's available right now. I hope that answers your question, Derek.
Yeah, that was perfect.
Yeah.
And I was curious if anyone else thought anything.
Yeah, actually something we'll want to promote in the next meeting when we talk about employer sponsored, I think, is getting that message out, and how can we all amplify that message during this time. So great add to that, Jack. Good. All right. Well, again, I think we've got, it's like mission impossible, but I think it's really mission possible. We have a large group of items for consideration. I hope that you all spend as much time as you're able to devote to kind of digging in and learning and coming back to the next meeting with some ideas that you really want to be passionate about with this group. We've got a wide variety of expertise here. I'm excited to take this discussion further next time and actually go through that prioritization process. Again, we'll be together in 2 weeks. The 14th is the deadline for those solution recommendations to come in. So for those of you that have agreed to take that on, thank you. And we'll continue our work providing as much background information as we can. So when we send out, we'll try and send out, as we do the solution summary updates, we'll try and send out the full boat as opposed to trying to do onesies and twosies, so you don't have to go back and piece them all together. I know we sent out a couple today, but our next go around, we'll try and do the full boat, so you have like one PDF with them in. And if you have any concerns or questions on the process, we're trying to be as transparent as we can so we know what's coming ahead. Again, it's, one, being virtual, and two, just the extraordinary breadth of what we're having to cover in this task force, or what we get to cover. I guess it's a privilege. So we're very excited to be covering this. I think you are all doing a tremendous job, and I just appreciate willingness to take this on and put some of your hard work and intellect into helping us come down to a few concrete solutions. So my sincere thanks to all of you for your work. With that, I'll just pause 1 second. Any last questions, concerns? Mike?
I wrote it, but it would really be helpful. I know the deadline's the 14th, but if we could get those proposals out more than 24, 48 hours in advance, just so that we really have time to give them the attention that they deserve.
Very good. And we're doing our best. So
I know.
we'll do the ones we get in on the 14th, probably the 15th or 16th, that next bucket. I think on Friday we'll come out with as many as we have at that point in time. So
That's great.
Great. All right. Very good. Thanks, everyone. Have a good 2 weeks till I see you next. Enjoy, stay well, and stay safe. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.